Well, now, it must be just about that time. My dears, I have an interesting and a different kind of story for you tonight. It's an excerpt from a novel, and it's by Virginia Woolf. Now, Virginia Woolf was an English writer considered one of the most important modernist 20th century authors, and a pioneer in the use of stream of consciousness as a narrative device. Among her novels are Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, A Room of One's Own. Let's get this light set properly. Okay. Her brilliant career came to a tragic close in 1941 when, fearing a recurrence of a mental breakdown, she committed suicide by drowning. But this piece is called Flush Meets His Rival. And I'll quote from the lead-in to the excerpt I'm reading. Flush is a biography of unusual interest. Its intimate picture of two world-famous poets, Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, during one of the most intense phases of their lives, is revealed through the thoughts and actions of Miss Barrett's Cocker Spaniel. The opening chapters narrate Flush's early life in the country, how he was presented to Miss Barrett, his first adventures in his new London home, and the growing affection between him and his new mistress. One night early in January 1845, the postman knocked. Letters fell into the box, as usual. Wilson went downstairs to fetch the letters, as usual. Everything was as usual. Every night, there was a letter for Miss Barrett. But tonight, the letter was not the same letter. It was a different letter. Flush saw that, even before the envelope was broken. He knew it from the way that Miss Barrett took it, turned it, looked at the vigorous, jagged writing of her name. He knew it from the indescribable tremor in her fingers, from the impetuosity with which they tore the flap open, from the absorption with which she read it. He watched her read, and as she read, he heard, as when we are half asleep, we hear through the clamor of the street some bell ringing, and know that it is addressed to us, alarmingly, yet faintly, as if someone far away were trying to rouse us with the warning of fire or burglary or some menace against our peace, and we start in alarm before we wake. So Flush, as Miss Barrett read the little blotted sheet, heard a bell rousing him from his sleep, warning him of some danger menacing his safety, and bidding him sleep no more. Miss Barrett read the letter quickly. She read the letter slowly. She returned it carefully to its envelope. She, too, slept no more. Again, a few nights later, there was the same letter on Wilson's tray. Again, it was read quickly, read over, read slowly, read over and over again. Then it was put away carefully, not in the drawer with the voluminous sheets of Miss Mitford's letters, but by itself. Now Flush paid the full price of long years of accumulated sensibility lying couched on cushions at Miss Barrett's feet. He could read signs that nobody else could even see. He could tell by the touch of Miss Barrett's fingers that she was waiting for one thing only, for the postman's knock, for the letter on the tray. She would be stroking him, perhaps, with a light, regular movement. Suddenly, there was the rap. Her fingers constricted. He would be held in a vice while Wilson came upstairs. Then she took the letter, and he was loosed and forgotten. Yet, he argued, what was there to be afraid of, so long as there was no change in Miss Barrett's life? And there was no change. No new visitors came. Mr. Kenyon came as usual. Miss Mitford came as usual. The brothers and sisters came, and in the evening Mr. Barrett came. They noticed nothing. They suspected nothing. So he would quiet himself and try to believe, when a few nights passed without the envelope, that the enemy had gone. A man in a cloak, he imagined, a cowled and hooded figure, had passed like a burglar, rattling the door, and finding it guarded, had slunk away defeated. The danger, Flush tried to make himself believe, was over. The man was gone. And then the letter came again. As the envelopes came more and more regularly, night after night, Flush began to notice signs of change in Miss Barrett herself. For the first time in Flush's experience, she was irritable and restless. She could not read and she could not write. She stood at the window and looked out. She questioned Wilson anxiously about the weather. Was the wind still in the east? Was there any sign of spring in the park yet? Oh, no, Wilson replied. The wind was a cruel east wind still. And Miss Barrett, Flush felt, was at once relieved and annoyed. She coughed. She complained of feeling ill, but not so ill as she usually felt when the wind was in the east. And then, when she was alone, she read over again last night's letter. It was the longest she had yet had. There were many pages, closely covered, darkly blotted, scattered with strange little abrupt hieroglyphics. So much Flush could see from his station at her feet, but he could make no sense of the words that Miss Barrett was murmuring to herself. Only he could trace her agitation after she came to the end of the page and read aloud, though unintelligibly, "Do you think I shall see you in 2 months, 3 months?" Then she took up her pen and passed it rapidly and nervously over sheet after sheet. But what did they mean, the little words that Miss Barrett wrote? April is coming. There will be both a May and a June if we live to see such things, and perhaps, after all, we may. I will indeed see you when the warm weather has revived me a little, but I shall be afraid of you at first, though I am not in writing thus. You are Paracelsus, and I am a recluse, with nerves that have been broken on the rack, and now hang loosely, quivering at a step and a breath. Flush could not read what she was writing, an inch or two above his head, but he knew just as well as if he could read every word how strangely his mistress was agitated as she wrote, what contrary desires shook her, that April might come, that April might not come, that she might see this unknown man at once, that she might never see him at all. Flush, too, quivered as she did, at a step, a breath, and remorselessly the days went on. The wind blew out the blind. The sun whitened the busts. A bird sang in the mews. Men went crying fresh flowers to sell down Wimpole Street. All these sounds meant, he knew, that April was coming, and May and June. Nothing could stop the approach of that dreadful spring. For what was coming with the spring? Some terror, some horror, something that Miss Barrett dreaded, and that Flush dreaded too. He started now at the sound of a step, but it was only Henrietta. Then there was a knock. It was only Mr. Kenyon. So April passed, and the first 20 days of May, and then on the 21st of May, Flush knew that the day itself had come. For on Tuesday, the 21st of May, Miss Barrett looked searchingly in the glass, arrayed herself exquisitely in her Indian shawls, bade Wilson draw the armchair close, but not too close, touched this, that, and the other, and then sat upright amongst her pillows. Flush couched himself taut at her feet. They waited, alone together. At last, Marylebone Church clock struck 2. They waited. Then Marylebone Church clock struck a single stroke. It was 2:30. And as the single stroke died away, a rap sounded boldly on the front door. Miss Barrett turned pale. She lay very still. Flush lay still too. Upstairs came the dreaded, the inexorable footfall. Upstairs, Flush knew, came the cowled and sinister figure of midnight, the hooded man. Now his hand was on the door. The handle spun. There he stood. "Mr. Browning," said Wilson. Flush, watching Miss Barrett, saw the color rush into her face, saw her eyes brighten and her lips open. "Mr. Browning," she exclaimed. Twisting his yellow gloves in his hands, blinking his eyes, well-groomed, masterly, abrupt, Mr. Browning strode across the room. He seized Miss Barrett's hand and sank into the chair by the sofa at her side. Instantly, they began to talk. What was horrible to Flush as they talked was his loneliness. Once he had felt that he and Miss Barrett were together in a firelit cave. Now the cave was no longer firelit. It was dark and damp. Miss Barrett was outside. He looked round him. Everything had changed. The bookcase, the 5 busts, they were no longer friendly deities, presiding approvingly. They were alien, severe. He shifted his position at Miss Barrett's feet. She took no notice. He whined. They did not hear him. At last he lay still in tense and silent agony. The talk went on, but it did not flow and ripple as talk usually flowed and rippled. It leaped and jerked. It stopped and leaped again. Flush had never heard that sound in Miss Barrett's voice before, that vigor, that excitement. Her cheeks were bright as he had never seen them bright. Her great eyes blazed as he had never seen them blaze. The clock struck 4, and still they talked. Then it struck 4:30. At that, Mr. Browning jumped up. A horrid decision, a dreadful boldness marked every movement. In another moment, he had wrung Miss Barrett's hand in his. He had taken his hat and gloves. He had said goodbye. They heard him running down the stairs. Smartly, the door banged behind him. He was gone. But Miss Barrett did not sink back in her pillows as she sank back when Mr. Kenyon or Miss Mitford left her. Now she still sat upright. Her eyes still burned, her cheeks still glowed. She seemed still to feel that Mr. Browning was with her. Flush touched her. She recalled him with a start. She patted him lightly, joyfully on the head, and smiling, she gave him the oddest look, as if she wished that he could talk, as if she expected him, too, to feel what she felt. And then she laughed pityingly, as if it were absurd. Flush, poor Flush, could feel nothing of what she felt. He could know nothing of what she knew. Never had such wastes of dismal distance separated them. He lay there, ignored. He might not have been there, he felt. She no longer remembered his existence. And that night she ate her chicken to the bone. Not a scrap of potato or of skin was thrown to Flush. When Mr. Barrett came as usual, Flush marveled at his obtuseness. He sat down in the very chair that man had sat in. His head pressed the same cushions that man's had pressed, and yet he noticed nothing. Don't you know, Flush marveled, Who's been sitting in that chair? Can't you smell him? For to Flush, the whole room still reeked of Mr. Browning's presence. The air dashed past the bookcase and eddied and curled round the heads of the 5 pale busts. But the heavy man sat by his daughter in entire self-absorption. Aghast at his obtuseness, Flush slipped past him out of the room. But in spite of their astonishing blindness, even Miss Barrett's family began to notice, as the weeks passed, a change in Miss Barrett. She left her room and went down to sit in the drawing room. Then she did what she had not done for many a long day. She actually walked on her own 2 feet as far as the gate at Devonshire Place with her sister. Her friends, her family, were amazed at her improvement. But only Flush knew where her strength had come from. It came from the dark man in the armchair. He came again and again and again. First it was once a week, then it was twice a week. He came always in the afternoon and left in the afternoon. Miss Barrett always saw him alone. And on the days when he did not come, his letters came. And when he himself was gone, his flowers were there. And in the mornings when she was alone, Miss Barrett wrote to him. That dark, taut, abrupt, vigorous man, with his black hair, his red cheeks, and his yellow gloves, was everywhere. Naturally, Miss Barrett was better. Of course she could walk. Flush himself felt that it was impossible to lie still. Old longings revived. A new restlessness possessed him. Sleep became impossible while that man was there. Flush lay with his eyes wide open, listening. Though he could make no sense of the little words that hurtled over his head from 2:30 to 4:30, sometimes 3 times a week, he could detect with terrible accuracy that the tone of the words was changing. Miss Barrett's voice had been forced and unnaturally lively at first. Now it had gained a warmth and an ease that he had never heard in it before. And every time the man came, some new sound came into their voices. Now they made a grotesque chattering. Now they skimmed over him like birds flying widely. Now they cooed and clucked as if they were 2 birds settled in a nest. And then Miss Barrett's voice, rising again, went soaring and circling in the air. And then Mr. Browning's voice barked out its sharp, harsh clapper of laughter. And then there was only a murmur, a quiet humming sound as the 2 voices joined together. But as the summer turned to autumn, Flush noted with horrid apprehension another note. There was a new urgency, a new pressure and energy in the man's voice, at which Miss Barrett, Flush felt, took fright. Her voice fluttered, hesitated, seemed to falter and fade and plead and gasp, as if she were begging for a rest, for a pause, as if she were afraid. Then the man was silent. Of him they took but little notice. He might have been a log of wood lying there at Miss Barrett's feet, for all the attention Mr. Browning paid him. Sometimes he scrubbed his head in a brisk, spasmodic way, energetically, without sentiment, as he passed him. Whatever that scrub might mean, Flush felt nothing but an intense dislike for Mr. Browning. The very sight of him, so well-tailored, so tight, so muscular, screwing his yellow gloves in his hand, set his teeth on edge. Oh, to let them meet sharply, completely, in the stuff of his trousers. And yet he dared not. Taking it all in all, that winter, 1845 to 1846, was the most distressing that Flush had ever known. just an excerpt, my dears, from Flush by Virginia Woolf. And the whole thing is marvelous. If you feel you would like to know more, get it, read it all. She was just an extraordinary writer. And I tend to think of her as formidable, but she's not. She's accessible. And that was a big surprise to me when I finally realized that. I think it was with Mrs. Dalloway that I finally thought, what have I been afraid of? This is fascinating. This is interesting. This is good stuff. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. Please investigate her further. That's Virginia Woolf, the one and only Virginia Woolf. And that is an excerpt from Flush. Good night.